still four sides, still a quadrilateral. It has exactly one pair of parallel sides. Those bases. They're generally on the top and bottom. There's two, and they're not the same size, so we call one base 1 and the other base 2. The sides that aren't the bases are called the legs. Angles that are at the bottom are called base angles. There's two different kinds of trapezoids. There's just your normal trapezoid, and then what's called an isosceles trapezoid. An isosceles trapezoid is a little bit easier to work with because they're pretty much all congruent. Your legs are congruent, the base angles are congruent, and the diagonals that make them up are also congruent. Something to note, the diagonals are only the whole, not the pieces. So if I was going to mark up this trapezoid, these two legs, or the sides, are the same. The angles at the bottom that make up the base angles are the same. The two angles at the top, also base angles here, because remember top and bottom are called base. They're also the same. And then on the inside, there's two diagonals. That just goes from corner to corner. And those two are the same. The whole thing is the same. Something to be aware of, this still goes kind of like the parallelogram. You have sets of supplementary or equal to 180 pairs of angles. Those are the ones on the same side. So those two equal 180 or supplementary. And same thing on the other side. Those would also equal 180. Remember, the whole thing is still equal to 360 because that's just what a quadrilateral is made of. So if we're looking at this very first example, it says if this whole thing is an isosceles trapezoid, so we can stop because it's an isosceles and I can go ahead and mark it. I know this and this are the same, and I know the diagonals are the same, and I know that the base angles are the same. So now I can go through and start filling it out. It says WV is 15 and VY is 10. Now I know that the whole diagonals are equal, but the halves aren't. That's why one's 15 and one's 10. So for me to figure out the whole thing, I'm just going to take both of those numbers and add them together. 10 plus 15 gives you 25. So if one diagonal is 25, I know the other diagonal has to be 25. Then I can also start looking at the angles. This says Y, Z, W. If I go from Y to Z to W, back, I'm at this angle right here. That's 45. So I have already color-coded it, so that makes it a little bit easier. If this angle down here is 45, so is this other pink angle. Now on the same side, along the same leg, those two are going to be supplementary. So that means these two are both supplementary. That means they're equal to 180. So if I need to find the one that's missing, I would just take 180 and subtract 45. So now I can start filling everything in. X, W, Z. X, W, V, go back to the middle, is the pink one. So that's 45 degrees. W, X, Y, that's this T1. That's whatever 180 minus 45 is. That's 135. W, X, U. Well, I don't know that one yet. We'll skip it. We can come back to it. Then my very last one is X, Z. That's this other diagonal. I already know what it is, and I've marked it. It's 25. So now I need to come back and figure out W, X, U. If I went W, X, U, W to X to U. That's this tiny, tiny, tiny little angle right here where I'm putting this black dot. Over here, I know that this is a right triangle because here is a right angle. That's an altitude that makes that up. That's the height. So I know there's 90 degrees, and this part is 45 degrees. So for me to figure out the missing angle, it's just 180 minus 90 minus 45. So if I were to type that in my calculator, that would also give me 45. Now I can go to the next page. Number 2 tells me to find the measure of angle R, but before I can do that, I need to figure out what this is. These two angles are on the same side. They're along the same leg. That means they are supplementary. If they're supplementary, all I have to do is set them equal to 180. To do my nice lazy method, I'm going to star my x's. Sorry, not star, triangle my x's, and combine my like terms that way. That becomes 12x plus 7x. 12 plus 7 is 19, so that's 19x. Then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to circle my constants. That's negative 13 plus 3. If I type that in a calculator, that gives me negative 10. And I know that has to be equal to 180 because supplementary angles are 180. So now I just need to solve this two-step equation. First I add 10. That gives me 19x is equal to 190. Then I divide. That gives me x is equal to 10. Now I'm not finished yet, because this didn't just say find x, it said find the measure r. So I now need to take this x value and plug it back in. This was 7 times 10 minus 13. If I type that in my calculator, that tells me the measure of angle r is equal to 57. Pause the video, see if you can figure out number 3. Remember, these markings tell you that it's parallel. Otherwise, you just need to set these equal to 180. Plug it back in, and then you can figure everything out. Next, we're going to go to number 4. Number 4 is talking about DF. That's one full diagonal. Oh, it's getting a little bit blurry. Then we also have GE. That's the other full diagonal. I know diagonals in a isosceles trapezoid like this are congruent, so I'm going to set them equal and solve for x. We move our letters to the left, so that subtracts 3x from both sides. We move our numbers to the right, so that adds 77 to both sides. 6 minus 3 gives me 3. 77 plus 8 gives me 85. Last step is always to divide, so I'm going to divide both sides by 3. 85 divided by 3 is 28.3. Decimals are still fair game. So that's everything for just the trapezoid. But with trapezoids, there's something else called a trapezoid midsegment. In a trapezoid midsegment, there's different pieces that we have to come with. It's really helpful if you have 2 different color highlighters or 4 different color highlighters. If you don't have them, no big deal. So the midsegment, that's the part in the middle. Segment, middle, midsegment. Midsegment is parallel to the bases, so that means they're never going to touch. Remember, in a trapezoid, we have 2 bases. We call one base 1, the other base 2. The length of the midsegment is half of the sum. Of the lengths of the bases. So that means if I were to write an equation, half means I'm dividing by 2, sum means I'm adding the 2 bases. So my midsegment is equal to base 1 plus base 2 divided by 2. Before I do anything, I need to make sure that I know what pieces go with what. So this is base 1 at the top. This is my mid segment. Base 2 is at the bottom. Now a second ago I said highlighters would be helpful. That is because we need to make sure we understand the angles inside a trapezoid, especially with the mid segment, to make sure we know where to put them. So it follows this pattern. Because these are parallel and there's something being cut in half, these are corresponding angles. That means if they're in the same spot, they are the same. So on this side, there's that pattern, and that pattern also exists on the other side. Kind of the same as before when we did the trapezoids. Remember, angles on the same side are consecutive angles. Are supplementary, that still applies. So consecutive angles are still supplementary. Remember, supplementary just means they're equal to 180. So now I just need to go through each of these 4 problems and figure out, using this picture, what is what. So I'm going to label these underneath them. If I have a base 1, base 2, or mid segment, and then I'm just going to fill them into the formula that we have. AB is base 1, DC is base 2, EF is the mid segment. So this is just plugging stuff into the formula and then typing it in the calculator. It says if base 1 is 14 and base 2 is 26, find the mid segment. So that's just doing 14 plus 26 divided by 2. Control divide in your calculator, and you can type everything in exactly like it looks. It should give you a value of 20. Pause the video, see if you can figure out number 6. Okay, now looking at number 7. EF is my mid segment. DC is base 2. AB is base 1. So this kind of changes the way that I do this. I have to work backwards here. So if I have to work backwards, I have to undo what's being done. It's the same 2 steps every time. So right now in my formula, I'm dividing by 2. So I have to undo that divided by 2. So that means my first step is to multiply by 2. And then my second step is just to figure out what's missing. So solve for x. So if I'm filling this into the formula, it goes mid segment equals base 1 plus base 2 divided by 2. Mid segment was 22. Base 1, I don't know, so we're going to call that x. Base 2 is 38. So there is just everything that it gave me filled in. So now I need to work backwards. My first step was to multiply both sides by 2. If I multiply both sides by 2, the only thing that does is cancel out the 2's on the right. Then I just do the normal math on the left. 22 times 2 gives me 44. So now I'm just left with a one-step equation. It says 44 equals x plus 38. To get x by itself, you just undo, so you subtract 38 from both sides. So that gives you an x value of 6. So that means base 1 is 6. Pause the video, see if you can solve number 8. It's the same process, even though you're finding base 2 instead. Just a little bit more. So now I have the same trapezoid again, and it tells you that here's the mid segment. So before I do anything, I'm going to label what I've got. I know this is base 1, this is the mid segment, this is base 2. Base 1 and base 2, it doesn't matter if you put it on top or bottom. You just have to make sure you're being consistent. So now I can go through and I can start solving. I didn't fill in my angle markings to match up here. I'm going to do that before I try and solve. So same thing as up there. Corresponding angles are the same. Consecutive angles are equal to 180. Remember, corresponding means next to. No, sorry, consecutive means next to. Corresponding just means they're in the same position. Too many C's. Okay, so here's where we're at. There is everything marked just like it looked at the top. I'm going to go through this question. Just a little. There we go. I'm going to go through this question and label what it says. It says GFE. So I'm going to trace from GFE, go back to the middle. That's 42. So now automatically, because I've already color-coded it before I started, I know the other pink dot on my paper is 42. I also know that corresponding same spot. That's why those two are the same. But our star from up here says consecutive angles are supplementary or equal to 180. Consecutive just means they go together. So that means I can figure out the missing with the green dot by saying 180 minus 42. That gives me 132. Nope, that gives me 138. So now I know both of those two dots. I know the pink and the green. So now I just need to match them to their names. NME, if I trace from N to M to E, go back to the middle letter, is 42. MEH, M to E to H, go back to the middle letter, that's the teal or green, that's 138. So all I have to do is match my colors basically. Kind of the same with the rectangles. If you color-coded your rectangles, the same position, the pattern is always going to be the same. So now I need to finish this last part. It says solve for x if FG is base 1, is that, EH, that's base 2, is this, and NM is your mid-segment. So all I've done is labeled just like I did in 5, 6, 7, and 8. But now this is a little bit different because this has algebra in it. So I'm going to change my formula a little bit. So I'm going to come back up here. For numbers, we're going to use just the straightforward formula. If you have algebra in it, you're going to change your formula just a little bit. And this might help to put on a brain dump at the beginning of class on Monday. When I'm using algebra, instead of trying to divide something by 2 that I don't know, because I can't divide an x if I don't know what it is, I'm going to change my formula to say 2 times your mid-segment equals base 1 plus base 2. It's kind of like when we worked backwards earlier. You multiplied 2 first. You can manipulate your formula like this because of that. Okay, so now we can come back down here because I have a formula to work with. I know it's 2 times mid-segment equals B1 plus B2. So all I need to do is fill in what I know. I know 2 times the mid-segment is 22. And I know base 1 was 4x plus 4. And base 2 is x plus 5. So now I need to simplify both sides. The left side is easy to simplify. You just type it in the calculator. That becomes 44. Right side, I need to simplify by combining my like terms. So I'm going to, same process as always, figure out my x's by combining like terms and figure out my constants by combining like terms. So in order for me to do that, I triangled and circled them. I'm going to add my triangles first because x's always come first. 4 plus 1 gives me 5x. Then I'm going to add my, just numbers, my constants. 4 plus 5 gives me 9. So now I just have a two-step equation to work with. To get x by itself, I move 9 over by doing the opposite. And that gives me 35 is equal to 5x. 35 is equal to 5x. I divide both sides by 5. That gives me an x value of 7. Your practice is due before you leave, so make sure you finish that and turn it into the tray.